I did it a lot too.
All right, here we are. Today is February 25th. This is the Administrative Committee regular meeting. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of our January 14th minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
There was
All right.
nothing, they were fine.
Everything looks fine to me too, so that is approved. The next item is the request authorization for the beer garden for the Renaissance Fair 2019, and we have Dwight presenting here for us.
Good afternoon. Not a lot of difference here than what we've done in the past. The Ren Fair is looking at May 4th and 5th for their 2019 festival, and the beer garden on the 4th would be from 11:30 to 7:30. On the 5th would be from noon to 5. The map is the same. The beer garden is the same location, East City Park. And their president this year is Randy Emerson. For tonight, I have Dean Pittenger here.
Hi.
And the police have gone through this and you have their thumbs up. They'll provide their own security, and we've not had any issues with this in the past either. So, and then just to let you know, I did have a typo on here. I'll fix that for the council meeting. And with that, if you have any questions of me, I'm here, and Dean's here if you have any questions.
Is this one of the moments that they, the barriers are rented? Remember the fence
Sometimes it's
pieces?
barriers, or we put up just the snow fence.
The
Do you guys
orange.
rent the barriers?
Yeah, no, we hadn't rented the barrier, we just put up, actually the same snow fence that, Jim Bowen uses for, the rendezvous.
Rendezvous.
He lets us use that, and we, just use that. I think we may, pitch in and buy green instead of industrial orange, just for, because I'm assuming it doesn't really have to be orange, so.
It's
Yeah.
prettier green too, I would say.
No, anyway, no, it's just a.
More
just a-
garden-like.
Yes,
Garden-like.
yes.
I appreciated everything. I liked the Soul Mission was the annual celebration of spring. I thought that was really nice. But I had a question about was that location chosen as the original location for the beer garden? I didn't know, and I was just wondering why. It was on the north.
Why it's there?
that location.
We tried, when the first year we did this, which was about 4 years ago, something like that, we put it up with food courts.
Oh, yeah. that's
And it
right.
just didn't really work out. People weren't there. And we thought, let's put it down. We had space down there. We could move some things. We used to have part of recycling there. We just moved them over a little bit and squeezed us in there. And that way the people in the beer garden, assuming it's nice, can sit there and listen to music and enjoy themselves.
Thanks, because I had remembered the food and I didn't remember the change.
Oh, okay.
So thanks for that.
Okay. Does that
I
answer?
recommend
That does answer
approval.
my question.
Okay.
I think you did a good job. I would recommend, or move that we recommend approval. Put it on the consent.
Yes.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, well,
Same
thank you
old.
very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Guys.
All right, and next on the agenda is the City of Moscow Comprehensive Plan update with Mike Ray.
Afternoon.
Hi.
All right.
So this is our 2019 Comprehensive Plan update. This is pretty much a culmination of 2 years of hard work by the Planning and Zoning Commission up to this point. We've got it scheduled for public hearing at the council's upcoming meeting next Monday. So just give you kind of a broad overview of where we've come from up to this point, and just kind of a broad look at some of the updates that we're proposing in the comp plan. So we last rewrote comprehensive plan in 2009, so this is really, taking what we had before in 1999 and completely rewriting the document. It was during the time we had an extensive public outreach participation program. Included neighborhood meetings, community-wide meetings, working groups, a steering committee, as well as public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. So what the comp plan directs us to is, in order to be effective and successful, it must be a living and dynamic document, which means it needs to be, reviewed and updated consistently. So since community decision makers rely on the plan, it's important for those periodic reviews and amendments to be made just to keep it current. And they direct us that every 5-10 years it should be reviewed, evaluated, and updated with up-to-date information, methods, and maps, and looking at reaffirming community values, and taking a look at the objectives and implementation steps. So that's really the mechanism that we follow through on the goals of the comp plan, or through objectives and implementation actions, and that's the way the comp plan's set up. So in early 2017, the Planning and Zoning Commission really initiated the process of updating the plan. So they went through the entire document and looked at updating community data, maps, and objectives, as well as those implementation actions that we've accomplished over the years. And they also consulted with other city commissions. Sustainable Environment Commission was one of those commissions that they consulted with. That was a great help to update the certain sections of the plan that pertain to those commissions. And then on October 24th of last year, the commission conducted an open house meeting, and that coincided with the start of a 30-day public comment period, which ran until November 23rd of last year. So we did receive numerous comments during that comment period, as well as the open house, and many of those were subsequently incorporated in the final draft, which is attached to your packet today. And then earlier this year, on January 23rd, the commission conducted a public hearing, and they recommended approval of the comprehensive plan as presented with no modifications, and forwarded that recommendation on to City Council. And like I had mentioned at the start, that City Council public hearing scheduled for March 4th, which is next Monday. So just to give you kind of a broad overview of the organization of the plan, really divided into 8 sections. There's a preface, which includes the introduction and purpose. Chapter 1 is devoted to the community context, kind of gives the history of the community. Chapter 2 is community character and land use. 3 is dedicated to community mobility. It's our transportation chapter. 4 is parks, recreation, and open space. 5 deals with our infrastructure, so public services, utilities, and growth capacity. 6 is the economic development chapter. And Chapter 7 discusses implementation of the comprehensive plan and future updates, and lays out that process. So just to give you an overview, Chapter 1, so the main updates included some demographic information. 2009, we had a 2010 census that came out shortly after that was adopted. We were just relying on the population estimates and things of that nature previously, so we've got a lot of good numbers since that point. Updated floodplain information. There's a floodplain that changed within the city for Paradise Creek. There's the daylighting project at the university, which changed a lot of our maps and retracted the floodplain within downtown. And then this is a new section. The Sustainable Environment Commission ended up recommending being added to the plan. Local response to changing global climate conditions. And there was, I think, 7 areas of concern that they wanted to be identified, and each of those has a paragraph below that identifies the concern, as well as some actions that could be taken to mitigate some of the issues that we may see in the future. So there's water, air quality, energy usage, transportation, infrastructure and environmental impacts, climate migration, and food security. Chapter 2, updates included, again, the community information. So a lot of the community data was updated, population, things of that nature. We had one directive as far as home occupations, to incorporate home occupations within our code, which we have done that, so we are updating that specific section, as well as historic districts. So we've got the major Fort Russell expansion, and so that needed to be reflected in the document, and so we ended up doing that, as well as the urban renewal districts, Alturas ended up expiring, or ended up being closed. The 20-year horizon mark reached an end, and so we just needed to update that section as well as some text within Legacy Crossing. And then our street tree program, I think that primarily dealt with the landscaping section, so we had revised that program, as you're aware, and just updating that within Chapter 2. And then there are multiple maps within that chapter that were updated. So we've got existing land use map, really just looking at the areas that have changed since 2009 or been developed, and updating to the current land uses, as well as the future land use map. And that really directs what the zoning, so anytime you have a rezone that occurs, you want to look at what the future land use map and the comprehensive plan land use designation is on those specific properties. And that really directs you to the corresponding zoning district. And so we were, the major change there is we had this neighborhood conservation district before, and it really didn't give a whole lot of direction as far as what the future land use should be in the future zoning designation. And so we went a little bit different direction there. Instead of creating neighborhood-specific zoning districts, we just ended up pretty much reassigning the neighborhood conservation to more designations that we already had within the comp plan, like high-density residential, auto-urban residential, auto-urban commercial, designations like that. And so the problem was before, we'd be faced with a rezone and maybe it was neighborhood conservation. Well, it really didn't give you a whole lot of direction, just said that you should just whatever the designation that corresponds to the surrounding neighborhood. And so it really didn't give you a whole lot of direction there. And so we ended up changing the way we were headed and revisiting that and then changing the direction that we went. Chapter 3, the major updates, again, were community information, community data. We had some bicycle commuter data that was updated, vehicle collision data, integration of the Public Arts Master Plan. So since 2009, we worked with the Arts Department to create a Public Art Master Plan, and so just updating the section on public art within Chapter 3. And then once again, we have the street tree program that needed to be updated. And then the maps, we have the thoroughfare plan, which is really the major map within Chapter 3, and that's the all the classifications and future alignments of roadways in the city. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission spent quite a bit of time on that, worked through the Transportation Commission, and Les McDonald, the Public Works Director, came to a few of those meetings to talk about classifications of roadways. And Planning and Zoning is making some recommendations based upon Transportation Commission's recommendations, as well as the multimodal transportation plan that came out in around 2012, 13, that pretty much gave us some direction on a lot of the transportation related items within the city. And so that's been updated, as well as accident-prone intersections, really just taking what was created with the multimodal transportation plan and inserting that within Chapter 3, multipurpose pathways updated as well. Transit routes, which have changed slightly since 2009, so we updated that with a multimodal transportation plan as well. Chapter 4, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space chapter. Some of the highlights of those updates, once again, the demographic data was updated. Existing and future parks needs assessments, so looking at what our existing inventory is and what in the future we may need as far as parks goes. This is based upon population estimates that were updated within Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 as well. Parks have been added since 2009, so we have a number of those: Baker Street Park, Lillian Woodworth Ottness Park, Indian Hills Park, Morgan's Orchard, Harvest Park, and Atani Park have been added, so we needed to incorporate those within the chapter. And then just the note of the name change from Eastgate Park to Triangle Park, which occurred late last year. Chapter 5, our infrastructure chapter. The main updates that we saw were, if you recall in 2012, we did the comprehensive water system plan. So that really directed a lot of the updates within this chapter for water system. And then we had the 2011 comprehensive sewer system plan, And that really informed, a lot of the information that we had in the comp plan with better information, because we have a lot better idea about our systems with those two comprehensive systems plans that were done. And then well number 10, obviously with the creation and drilling of that well, updated well production information, total water production, PBAC, Pollution Basin Aquifer Committee, they have a water action plan that they ended up updating since 2009, so we just really took what they had and inserted it in the document, as well as single stream recycling to reflect the changes that have occurred since 2009. Water conservation strategies, so we have the rebate program for the low flow toilets and the Y-scaping, and so just updating those sections to reflect what we've done over the last few years. Economic development updates, so updating major employer information, employment and income for the top 5 industries, updating enrollment and salary type information for University of Idaho and Washington State University with number of employees as well. Looking at the economic sectors and updating those, economic indicators. And then Chapter 7, implementation, really a small chapter, but the only thing that we had updated here was the evaluation and appraisal report. So there was a directive before that, every so often, 5 to 10 years, the Community Development Department is supposed to go and write a report as to whether or not we think it should be updated. I think what we did in this circumstance was just work with the Planning and Zoning Commission and just say, hey, we're going to go through and update it anyway. I don't see why we have to do a report and waste that time when we're just going to update it anyway. And so we had struck that language from that section, and so that was really the major update there. But other than that, like I mentioned before, it's scheduled for public hearing before City Council on next Monday, March 4th. And I'll certainly go into a lot more detail, but just kind of wanted to give you a broad overview at this meeting. So, but I'd be able to answer any questions that you might have, and I think Wendy's here as well.
Oh, great.
Yes, questions for
Well, I have
Mike?
a lot of questions, but I think it had to do with the fact that how mine loaded. I feel like I'm behind. That's my issue with my technology. And so I was able to read all the comments, and so when you said numerous comments, I was kind of curious at what you meant by numerous comments. I got to read the ones that people had emailed, but was there a section that had, like, from the open houses, the little...
Yeah, and they should all be a part of your
It's all in
packet.
there, yeah.
Those are all of them. Yeah, that's what I meant by numerous, was just what's attached to your packet today. And those include those comment cards. So I believe we had 2 sheets that just have multiple comment cards on each sheet.
Yeah.
A lot of them are from the same people.
So I did see those in. So I just wondered if that was
Yep.
the feedback. If that was all
That
the
is
feedback. Okay.
it, yep.
Okay, so then I have loaded my information correctly. And then I have, is it okay if I keep?
Yes,
It says from the Idaho Code on page 3 of our comp plan that the plan shall consider trends, desirable goals, and objectives. And in your PowerPoint, you talk about that we can amend objectives. So I guess I was curious as to the discussion about how to strengthen the objectives. Because since you all had started the process, it seems like so many of the issues have become just more powerful for us to address as a city. And did you feel that shift when you were leading these conversations and people wanting those objectives to be stronger?
I mean, this is really just an update to what we had done in 2009, which took a whole lot of back work. There's a whole lot of work that was put into that, and as you can see, just the vast public outreach that occurred back then. We didn't really feel like the objectives should change at all. And so usually you have the goals, which really relate to the objectives, and then which really relate to the implementation actions, which carry out the goals and the objectives of whatever chapter it is. And so really the change that you should see is within the implementation actions.
Okay.
And so those are really the specific actions that you need to take in order to implement the goals and the objectives. And so we went through and struck a lot, the ones that we've accomplished with the implementation actions, and then in certain circumstances, we've added new implementation actions as well. And so there are a number of, like Parks and Rec, Commission. I know that they, with their street tree program, they really wanted to, we've already revamped that process. That was one of our directives before, was to take a look at the street tree program because we weren't getting the street trees in sufficient quantity that we needed with new subdivisions. And so we worked, for a year or two with a steering committee, and then, brought that through council, got that adopted. So we could strike that one off the list, and there was really like 3 or 4 sub-actions underneath those implementation actions that related to street trees and the street tree program. And, but the commission wanted, and the Parks and Rec Department wanted to reinsert language that moves on to the next, kind of the next goal.
So just to follow up, so what you're saying really is with the goals and objectives kind of maintaining their statements, the place that really the changes took place was within implementation.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the goals and the objectives are really the main direction the community wants to go. And so, you wouldn't see that dramatic of a shift within that short a period of time, within 5 to 10 years. Maybe you would in a community that's growing at a lot faster rate than we are, but we just are, averaged a little over 1% growth each year, and you just don't see that drastic change that you may see in the Treasure Valley or Kootenai County area that are looking at 4 or 5% annual, growth rates. And so, it just wouldn't be warranted to change a goal or objective unless something dramatic happened in that case. But you would see the changes in the implementation actions. You would, assume that as you go through the years that you would continually check off the implementation actions, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look back at the comp plan, keep you on track as the direction you're trying to go in order to obtain the goal that you're, looking for. So, does that answer your question?
Totally answers
Okay.
my question, thank you.
Yeah, I did notice that there's also some wording that the kind of public outreach process would be anticipated to be repeated closer at that 20-year mark unless something significant changed before then that would warrant relooking at the goals and objectives. But
And that's that would be our plan. This would just be an update, and then, the next 10 years, we would look at probably, doing a major update where it may be rewritten, a lot of it. So, but yeah, that's generally what you stick to, is the 5-10 year update, and then the 20-year, major update of the plan. So.
other questions?
Well, yeah, the other one had to do with the single stream piece, and I know that that's just history now. So can you write about, like, we don't know where we are yet in the comp plan? Do you put, like, it's still being developed? We have the master sanitation plan that,
Well, we try to just take a snapshot of where we are at a moment in time. As we are going through the process, there's a lot of things that continue to be updated. Like, we had updated that recycling section previously, and then we had the most recent changes to the single stream program that we had to go back in and update. And so it's just, from the time that, right before it gets to be adoption, you try to go in and just make it as accurate as possible. But you can't, it's hard to predict and speculate into the future what might happen. I mean, it's probably hard to speculate that we were going to get those restrictions placed on our single stream recycling, so.
Right.
okay.
I'll ask a question here. So, in the energy usage goal, the 20% by 2020 plan, do we know where we are towards that? If we're anywhere close to that, with 2020 approaching here pretty soon? Is that information out there?
That's typically been housed in administration. I think the sustainability intern has worked on that, but
We've done, through sustainability, which is now in the Environmental Services Group with the Water Division, done a greenhouse gas inventory for the city of Moscow as an organization. And we do that every, I think, 2 to 4 years, I think, is the schedule we've been on. And so, yes, that's been updated. I'm not sure of our progress to date. I know we've made progress. I don't know the information from the most recent report off the top of my head, but we are making progress towards that. I think doing fairly well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I know that this update says it will be, consideration of expanding that effort after 2020, but it's not defined, and I imagine we probably wouldn't be revisiting this for any updates until maybe 5 years from now, which would be past that. So, I wonder if we might want to set some kind of goal for 2030 at this time in this plan.
And I don't know, and Mike can correct me if I'm right, or if I'm wrong. That may be through the greenhouse gas inventory plan as the next report comes up. It may be time to get an idea of where we are with meeting that original goal and setting that goal through that plan, then referencing it then in another update of the comp plan. I feel Mike's being a little bit in the strategic plan as well as all these things fit into one, and it's that snapshot in time. So this would definitely be one in a series of comp plans. The one before this would remain in perpetuity as the comp plan that reigned for that number of years, with this one being the next iteration, and then catching, Mitch, like with the single stream recycling, catching that goal that we would update in the greenhouse gas inventory report in the next version of the comp plan. And so they kind of work together as we kind of leapfrog through this, I think.
Yeah, I think
That
the
makes sense.
anticipation would be that in 2020, that was our target year of reducing it to a certain level. And so I think you would probably have that conversation at council as to, well, it's, 2020 now, or it's about to reach 2020. Do we want to, go towards carbon neutrality, or, what type of reduction, beyond 2020 are we looking at? But I think that'd be a separate conversation. We're really just reflecting what the council's actions were before, the city's actions, as far as our reduction in greenhouse gases. And, but that really should be, council administration, and we were just really given pretty much the documents in here to reflect what has already been done.
I think it'd be hard to anticipate too what the technology is and what we could actually do in 2030. Now we can guess, but I do understand the nature of the snapshot, so.
Right, yeah. I would just hate to have had a 15-year goal, and then that time passes and we have no defined goal for a period of 5 or 10 years, but
Right.
it sounds like that's not what is anticipated to
Be
happen.
captured in a different report, different document, for sure.
Well, I think what's hard, so, when I ran for city council, this was what you use to base all your kind of thinking on, what you think you're going to be able to do to direct policy or create, I guess, kind of movement in the city. And at that time was the ring road. That was, that. And so there were lots of conversations about the ring road, even though that idea had definitely become obsolete already by the time I was, I think, running in 2015. So I guess what I'm asking, and I know I understand this is a snapshot, but isn't it also a visionary document too? And because of that, is it possible, or is it usual then to put in like what we think what we can tell the community's moving in this direction just from the conversations that we've had in this update, so that the next people that are going to be using this document for the next 5 years can then address the concerns or the information that's really come forward in the last 2 years, especially with the climate issues, and especially with what we know with infrastructure, and especially with IT. And I just wonder if how we do it is actually changing too.
Well, I mean, it is a long-range vision document, so it's generally that, it's our vision for the next 20, 30 years. When I was referring to a snapshot, I was just mainly referring to a snapshot of the data that we have right now, like the single stream. We don't know where that's going to go in the future. Population, obviously, we can project that based upon historical data. And so I think that the numbers and the information that we have that we're able to project that way, like population estimates, we do in the comp plan, but things that we have no idea, are what are gonna happen in the future, it's hard to really speculate on it and, make policy to something that we may not know. And I think it's better that maybe we have, kind of this historical knowledge, and then we can make our goals and implementation actions and objectives, towards, whatever we're looking at, I guess.
We gather that community movement through surveys, correct? Is that how we gather our goals and objectives and that whole thing?
It's one way that we try to measure where the community, their perceptions and where we're at on a variety of things. So.
Okay.
I mean, I'm thinking about the strategic planning document, which is also probably close to being due for an update as well. Would that be where those goals are defined more?
Well, I mean, it just depends on what it is. I mean, you have all kinds of documents, and they all are on the periphery, but, a lot of them are referenced within the comp plan, like, the comprehensive water system plan, comprehensive sewer system plan. All those documents inform the comprehensive plan and the data that's included in it. And so whenever we do studies and have plans like that, they all contribute to, making the comp plan a more fuller document, I guess.
So like when PEP came forward with the housing study that you all are doing. So because the comp plan's coming out now, and we know that housing's become an issue that definitely people are talking more about, the results will come, but the comp plan will have already been updated. So then how can we drive the information that we collect from what you all are doing with the implementation happening with the housing concerns with this document?
I think it's important to recognize this is really just a long-term land use planning document, and we put a lot of information in here. So we do include a lot of information about economic development or recycling or greenhouse gas emissions. We somewhat have taken this to a very high level of covering a lot of information about the community, but it doesn't necessarily drive all aspects of the community's activities or operations or aspirations even. It's first and foremost, it is a long-term policy document for the city that addresses future land use planning. That is really what it is, kind of first and foremost. But we do address, and we are statutorily required to address things like economic development and housing and special areas and all of those other additional items. But there are all very specific plans that address those items a little bit in more detail and really a little bit more directive for future actions. Now, with respect to the housing study, if there are any policies that the city needs to consider changing, then this document can be amended at any time and is fairly often. And so if there is something that, and I'm not sure what it would be at this point that would affect the comp plan, but we'll have to review that document. It's probably, I'm going to guess, at least 3, 4, 6 months out before we probably get the final report. And then we can evaluate whether it warrants or requires any changes to the comp plan. I don't know that it necessarily will. It may require changes to local zoning ordinances or regulations, but we already reflect in the comp plan that we want to provide for affordable housing, that it is a need in the community, that we want to provide for a wide variety of housing types to meet all market demands. As a policy, that's probably maybe about as far as you're going to go. The next step really becomes that implementation. And if there's a recommendation out of the housing study that says we should modify the zoning code to address this, that doesn't require us to go in and amend the comp plan to dictate that should happen. It'll probably fall underneath the umbrella of what we've already covered for our goals and objectives of housing and affordable housing. And if it is consistent with the comp plan, then that's a code amendment that the council could certainly consider to pass. And so it doesn't, but everything that we do does not necessarily have to be reflected in the comp plan, and it's really intended to capture the best available information we have at this point in time and making sure that it reflects the community's vision long term.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bill. I do have a housing question. Do you have numbers for the percentage of decline in the University of Idaho enrollment? And was that reflected in the housing needs projection? Because it looked like it was the same numbers as the 2009 that was anticipating growth in enrollment, and that's what all the projections of future housing needs and the types of housing needs were based on.
So the whole housing mix, the projected housing demand has been reworked from what was in the 2009 draft. So I think we went through, did an inventory, and the anticipated land area, anticipated housing units based on, I think there were 3 different actual population projections that were included in the 2009 plan, so we just went to a straight linear projection of population. So it does include all the census estimates of the city's population, that does include the students in that number as well. So before, I think there was a there was a geometric mean, there was an exponential, and then there was just a linear projection for population, and that kind of provided a range. So in this time, we just modified to just a single population projection, and then we recalculated the anticipated housing demand based on that. So while we didn't specifically take student population out for the decline that we have seen since 2011, we were using the current census numbers and estimate numbers in the total population projection that was utilized to come up with the anticipated housing needs.
Yeah, I think I can look over it later. I think there was still some wording in there that suggested an anticipated increase in student enrollment as part of
I
these
think it's always an
projections.
aspiration that that's going to
Yes,
happen.
I'm sure it is.
So we always have that aspirational statement in there.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if we necessarily spent a lot of time highlighting the decline. But I do know, I think I did the numbers, that we did rework the population projections and the housing demand that would come from that.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions. I saw Wendy was here, though. I didn't know if she wanted to say anything.
Oh, yeah. Did you want to come up here?
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you,
very
Bill.
much.
And you can just officially state your name.
Wendy McClure, Chair of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. Do I need my address? 621 East C Street. Anyway, I was just going to add to in response to the questions about how we responded to people who commented on the comprehensive plan. There was quite a bit of interest in climate change and some push to do more. And we had quite a bit of a in the plan, and we had quite a bit of discussion on it. And in line with what both Bill and Mike said, we really need a community climate action plan that comes from other entities that informs the comprehensive plan, but it's not really the job of the comprehensive plan to do that. And I think, does that kind of make sense? That's really all I wanted to add, that it's in line with the transportation plan or the community mobility plan or all the other ones we have that we try to reflect in the comprehensive plan, but they're not. It would be an enormous document that would get into too much detail if we included things like that. So that's really all I wanted to say, unless you have any other questions.
I do, if I can take the opportunity since you're here from planning and zoning. With the recharacterization of those minor arterials with, I believe it was A and 3rd and 6th? Is
Yes.
that correct? So in looking at the description of the different street types, I know one of the criteria is the volume of traffic, and then there are other criteria like not having many driveways that empty out into them and other things. So it seems it's hard to meet all of those in these cases. So how did you determine, tip you to the side that these really should be recharacterized?
Well, it came as a recommendation to us, not as an aspiration from us in there. But it was really to me that we felt that all 3 of those streets should be characterized the same way, that they were handling more traffic, but when we've talked to Les McDonald, et cetera, none of our minor arterials really meet the golden definition of the word. It just, like you reflected, I mean, we're at a much smaller community scale, so it wouldn't be like a minor arterial in Seattle or something. I mean, it's and so I guess there was this need for a hierarchy of some hierarchy, and that's really, and we felt correct me if I'm wrong, but the hierarchy would be similar for those 3 streets, basically. Instead of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the discussion at the commission level was that those 3 streets are essentially function the same. D Street, I believe, had been a minor arterial ever since, I think, the 60s or 70s. And so I think the commission was faced with, since they're, in their eyes, those are 3 similar streets that, pretty much function the same, that they should all be the same designation. And it was hard to take D Street away from minor arterial status. I think the multimodal transportation plan was recommending that 3rd be a minor arterial. I think that 6 probably functions more like a minor arterial than 3rd does. And so that was the discussion at the commission level, was that they're so similar that they thought that they should all be the same designation. And just based upon the history of D Street, and then Les coming to a couple meetings to discuss the context, like Wendy talked about, minor arterial is a lot different in Seattle or Spokane than it is here. But as with the traffic calming measures that have been implemented on 3rd, usually you wouldn't have that in a minor arterial, but
Or on D. I mean, we have, and, yeah.
junior high,
Exactly.
and so it really just depends on the community context, regardless of what it's designated
I don't
as.
like the name minor arterial personally. I was trying to, as a student, but it's just kind of the classification system we have.
But you have minor
Yeah.
arterials throughout the city that range in speed. Some of them go all the way down to 20, 25 miles an hour, whereas some you have 35, 40 miles an hour. And so it just really depends on the context of where the street goes through. And in this case, we already have streets that go through existing neighborhoods, and we already have those conflicts, and we have them going by schools. And really, the context of where the streets go through is going to dictate what gets done to those streets, not necessarily what the name of the street is as far as the designation. So that was really our discussion at the commission level.
Are there any other
Thanks,
questions for me, or?
Wendy.
No? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question with the collision data. Is there anything more current than 2011, or is that what we
We've
have?
just taken what we had in the multimodal transportation plan and just incorporated that in the document. There is more detailed information out there. When we reviewed it, it wasn't that much more inconsistent than what we had with the snapshot from 2011, the multimodal, so we decided just to leave it.
And I noticed in the original plan, there was mention of a goal to address the more accident-prone locations, and that doesn't seem to be in this rewrite. Is there a reason that we don't want to specifically?
Well, I mean, like Bill mentioned, the multimodal transportation plan is really going to be your transportation document that really gives you your directives as to what should be done as far as our transportation network. So, within that document is what we should be going off of as far as the improvements to the intersections.
Okay. 2 more little questions about the little collision part. Just in comparing them, in the 2009, it did show 14 sites, and this one showed 10, and the 2009 showed the percentages, and this one doesn't. Is that a deliberate, is there any reason for that, or is it just
It was
10 seemed
purely
sufficient? or-
It was purely the format that the multimodal transportation plan
Okay.
had done, and what we had previously that the consultant, I believe, put together. So that's purely just the way it had been done with the multimodal plan.
Ann, did you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think I missed this because you keep referencing the original, but where can you find, is there a document that has the original and the proposed changes so you can look at those two together?
Yeah, we still have that online, our city website for the comp plan.
Perfect, I just couldn't find it, so thank you for letting me ask that.
I have one other thing that I would be interested in maybe seeing if this is appropriate to be a part of the comp plan, but there's some discussion about adding, higher density developments as a sort of newer thing that we're recognizing that we need, that addresses parking issues and congestion and all of that. And would it be appropriate to include a goal to identify or explore satellite parking options for long-term vehicle storage to serve these higher density developments? Is the comprehensive plan an appropriate place for that?
Well, the specific designations talk about whether or not there should be a reduction in parking, and there's some, a few paragraphs and sections within the comp plan that talks about downtown and downtown parking, and possibly looking at a, kind of a fee in lieu of, or maybe requiring parking of new development downtown. So, I think something maybe would fit within that section. But I guess that, what would the scope of that be just in the downtown area as far as allowing that option? Because in the zoning code right now, we allow off-site parking within a certain distance to be able to satisfy parking requirements. It used to be a conditional use permit, now it's just staff approval. And so in a lot of those circumstances, if there's not enough area in order to fit parking on site, they have flexibility for joint use provisions as well as off-site parking that could be approved through our department, which we already do.
Right.
But it's,
Yeah.
not necessarily a quarter mile away or a half mile away, it's, within 500 feet, but.
I suppose I'm thinking more of maybe an addition that wasn't necessarily as identified as being needed in 2009, that we would like to explore some of these parking management options and opportunities to address parking in downtown and other areas that may include, and some things are listed. You have the fees in lieu of, and, but just an inclusion that it's part of our forward comprehensive thinking plan that these things need to be continued to be studied and looked at and addressed.
Yeah, I mean, we
and
have the
options
section,
explored.
with the section on downtown and downtown parking. I mean, you could certainly add a word or two in there if that was the direction that you wanted to go.
I'm hearing exactly what you're saying, and I'm wondering if that's maybe not something for the zoning, something in the zoning or the overall plan there, rather than the comp plan. I think that's where we're all kind of stumbling right now. We're really not entirely sure what goes in the separate little plans underneath the comprehensive plan. So is it part of the economic development plan that we have? It needs to be included somewhere, I believe, but
And if
is
it should be
this
here, we
plan?
don't want to miss the opportunity to stick it in there. That's all.
Right.
And the thought is to look at,
Satellite parking.
Well, exploring multiple parking management strategies as we move forward, which can include longer-term satellite parking for vehicle storage and some of these higher density, which we seem to be having more of these coming through planning and zoning.
yeah, I mean, certainly looking at downtown parking management options and exploring that in more detail. I mean, that's also in the transportation plan to look at transportation demand management, and sometimes that's not providing additional parking, sometimes it's promoting transit, biking, walking, other modes of transportation. So, I mean, that certainly is a subject that could be, is addressed in the comp plan now. It is contemplating that we need to look at the impact of additional developments downtown, actually in the central business district where we don't require parking. The comp plan does point to possible exploration of requiring parking for new infill development in the central business district, or a parking mitigation fee that the city would then utilize to potentially develop additional parking. I would probably put the satellite parking lot, especially if it's something that a project's going to build for its own exclusive use, not as a public parking lot. That just should be a requirement in the zoning code that they, that they provide a certain amount of parking, and we already provide the flexibility for joint use or off-site. So that's already really contemplated in the code. But if we're looking at really maybe wanting to do a more detailed study of the downtown parking system, how it's managed, how it's operated, what transportation demand management options are available, do we want to look at requiring additional parking of downtown infill developments? Most of what we've seen has been kind of on the edge, but we have had projects that have been close to the downtown core that have had, that have been higher scale. So that is certainly something that we could expound upon the language that's in the comp plan that addresses that. I guess the question is, what are we thinking that we'd like to have as an action that would come out of that? Is it to conduct a downtown parking study to assess the program and how it's managed and how it's achieving the community's goals? I don't know that we specifically, if Mike can pull to the goals and objectives of that.
That you're talking about.
Well, there is reference to the last study being done in
2008.
93 and the actual part, and then 2008, the Transportation Commission and all their recommendations, and that some of those should be implemented. But now here we are 11 years later, and there has been a lot more development since then. So I do think, in other implementation strategies in here talk about pursuing studies or different things, and I think we need current information. A lot of things have changed, and looking at different strategies to manage the parking that we already have, and just making it clear in the comprehensive plan that the city, I think, has some responsibility for that, has a role in
Sure.
that. It's not,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we have a number of, so there are 4 specific implementation actions. I guess 3 of those are specific to downtown parking that include parking loading provisions in the land development regulations for significant development, redevelopment proposals to provide off-street parking and loading. So that's not something that we have addressed in the central business district yet. It's a bit of a tricky question because of the limitation of land area that goes to development, that if we start requiring a repurposal, or a reuse of an existing building is converted to residential lofts, and then also has to require parking for that change or that nature, then that it becomes challenging for that property and challenging for it to provide. So we've just it's been there. We've been evaluating it. We haven't taken any action, or the council obviously hasn't taken any action on that item at this time. The other was to develop a plan for acquisition and development of public parking areas downtown and collect a fee in lieu of parking spaces on significant redevelopment projects that occur on parcels that are not large enough to support the required amounts of off-street parking.
so Bill, that one, like, that's where I'm thinking maybe it could include exploration of off-site, like off of downtown for the longer term storage, where it's not a requirement, not requiring developments to have more parking than they currently do, but saying, rather than just we'll pursue additional parking downtown, maybe we look at some off-site opportunities too, that is public parking, but that can serve these private developments and therefore benefits all of the public, because those cars that are being stored long-term and aren't needed most of the time are at least away a little ways. And
Yeah, and so if you look at, so we talk about acquisition, development of parking areas downtown or in surrounding areas, so certainly that can be modified. I mean, the overall, I think, a lot of these should be somewhat general so we can explore all the potential options that exist to address or manage the parking program. And even this is probably not quite as broad as I'd like to evaluate how the parking is managed, the duration of parking, so forth. And our in many ways, the goal is trying maybe not to have to dedicate so much land area to storage of vehicles and support other modes of transportation. So it is kind of that balancing act there between the two, between not wanting, if you make it easy for vehicles to be brought to the downtown core, you will just invite more vehicles, and then that will also require more area to be dedicated to storage of vehicles. So that is something that I think the council should be considering. I mean, obviously, we're hearing concerns about parking recently, and that's something that I think requires further study. And maybe modifying that to say, including but not limited to some options, including the downtown parking management, potential provision of off-site, long-duration parking areas, collection of an in lieu fee, but really setting the stage to maybe a more in-depth conversation that really what this document is going to probably provide for us, but just open the door to that conversation to explore those options and look at what might serve the community best. If that is something that the council would wish to see, we could certainly develop some draft language for your consideration at the hearing on Monday night.
I think adding a few other options would be desirable, but.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that's the overall feeling I had, and you've explained it, both of you, very well in terms of what the document means, but I just wanted more opportunity in the language to allow council to take action in that implementation part, and some of it felt confined, and.
Well, in a lot of these, we don't have solutions for every problem that
Oh, no,
addresses the
I
city or
don't
every
think we
challenge.
should,
This is
no.
really a kind of a global, just a policy view.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to have really precise implementation actions on all aspects of the community. It's going to reflect those more detailed studies. It's going to reflect, it's going to provide more information on future land use, because that's what it first and foremost is for.
And
But it won't have all the.
Right.
If you look at the water system capital plan, it's going to have the 20-year capital plan and all the improvements that need to be done. We won't reflect that here. We're going to address that the plan exists and and this is what it does, and here are maybe some constraint areas that have been identified in that plan, but that plan's going to have all the more concrete implementation actions in that plan. And the same thing for transportation, intersection improvements for safety. There's a long list of capital improvements in that plan. So that's where all those really more precise implementation actions are going to reside. It's not necessarily going to be here. We're going to reflect that that plan exists, and we're going to highlight some information in it just to make sure that we're addressing that topic here. But for the very specific things, in Parks and Rec master plans, the same thing. They're going to have the capital improvement plan for the park development and everything in that document. We're reflecting that plan exists here and highlighting information that's there, but the really more concrete implementation actions are going to be there. But I think, certainly we can look at that item and broaden that for the council's
I would
consideration.
be interested in that, because I think the way it reads now, leans a little more
Kinda
towards
to one.
making more regulations that potentially certain types of uses should require parking even when they're in the central business, which is requiring more parking without looking at managing the parking that is currently there, and could that be better? And can we look at getting some of these longer storage vehicles out of the downtown so that perhaps the creation of requirements for more parking to be provided are no longer necessary? So I would
Yeah.
like
We
that
can
to
broaden
be
that one. I think
reflected.
it'd be good.
Okay.
I'd like to add a few things here, Brandy and other counselors, is this document, the comprehensive plan rewrite, is a generality, and Bill had hit a little bit on that. It's not going to be specific. If you're looking for a specific thing, you're not going to get it. And you shouldn't get it, because as a council and as the mayor, we are determined as things come along to fix things and come forward. Now, we talk about parking, and parking needs to be addressed. We all know that. And that needs to be something that comes forward in front of transportation and revisited, because it hasn't been visited for a decade or so. And so with that being said, some of these things that we know are concerns that we continually hear about in our community, we need to address. But I'm not certain that we want to address those necessarily in the comprehensive plan rewrite. It should be something that we specifically tackle as we go along. And there'll be other things that would come along, whether it be climate change as we're moving along, or water, or whatever. Because if you try to make this document clear and crystal, you'll never have it. It'll never get done, because you'll always have a constant change. The reason this is supposed to be visited every 5 to 10 years is so that we can talk about some of these generalities and move forward. And so as I was on that planning committee in 2009, because I was the president of the council at that time, and we spent a number of years going over this. In fact, we started talking about the comprehensive plan rewrite back in 2003 when I was on planning and zoning, and it took like 6 years to get that document. And it's a very, very good document that's very well written, and the changes of these things are I think have been really good by planning and zoning. But it's like eating an elephant too. I think it's very easy to get into the mud and get clouded on it. But as a council, we need to look at things as things come along, Brandy. And you're absolutely right. Whether it be a satellite parking or whatever, but those things need to be discussed, and those are things that need to come up as we go along.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't get too overwhelmed by it when we do our comprehensive plan rewrite and get stuck, because it's awful easy to get stuck in the mud. And the reason that happens is you will have folks out there that are very interested in one specific thing or a certain area of something. And so those are why we need to work through things as we go along, as a city and as a council, because things change, and who knows, 5 years from now, something could very well be different. But I just wanted to share that with the council so that, so kind of an understanding. We're going to have a good conversation on this on Monday night. There's no doubt about that. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you, yeah. And, yeah, that makes sense. I just think in this case, since it is referring to implementing things that came out of the 2008 study, would like maybe that to be a little more open.
Yeah.
Because I think that's still a bit old to be automatically going to that, so, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was talking about, even with the climate stuff. And we know that now, even though it hadn't been done in looking at where the inclusive energies of solar and all those things, they now look like they're more feasible financially for a city too, but 10 years it wasn't there. And so it goes back to that, making sure that it's that open thing, so people go, oh yeah, well, Moscow's definitely considering that, so we can then implement it And I think that's mostly where I'm coming from, because I realize that all the work you all have done is coming from all these different documents being placed within this. I get that. But I didn't want to just be only tied to those documents in that way without having some sort of bridge to the next 5 years and that being there. I hope that makes sense.
I look forward to the conversation, because I think through it, we'll figure out where some of these things maybe fit better or fit more clearly, you know? And I agree with the mayor in that we as a city have to be nimble enough, you know, if that's a adjective you can use for a city, to deal with some of these issues similar to the housing study that came up. We know housing is an issue, and here's the opportunity to do some more data gathering and that sort of thing. So I think parking is coming up, and I don't know that, well, I'm not convinced it's here yet, but I do think we need to deal with it. But where it lands, it'll be an interesting conversation.
Okay.
Anything else? Anyone else have any comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thanks, Mike.
Are we ready to recommend forwarding the plan for the public hearing at the upcoming meeting?
I will make that motion.
Yeah, with the things that we talked about, like Bill saying maybe there's some language changes in places or areas that would apply. I'm sure he's going to have thought about that, and Mike too.
Right. Well,
Yeah. Okay.
okay, then we will forward that on to March 4th with some of the work on the
Sure.
parking.
I think it was the parking
Just
implementation and
just
actions
giving,
items. that-
opening that up a little bit, I
Yeah.
think was,
Yeah.
well, we
We can take a shot at
concretely,
that.
thank
Yeah.
you. All right, then, is that our last, that is our last item, so,
Move we adjourn?
all right.
Adjourn.